Chapter 32, The Scramble for Africa. Key information for knowledge. While you're listening, think about these questions. I'll give you the answers after the read. 1. What was trade like between Europeans and Africans before the 1800s? 2. Blank convinced King Leopold II of Belgium to invest in Africa. 3. What led to the scramble for Africa? 4. What happened to African nations and groups after the Berlin Conference? 5. The Dutch created two republics in South Africa in 1806, blank and the blank. 6. The Second Boer War was fought primarily over which of the two resources? A. Silver and gold. B. Diamonds and gold. C. Emeralds and gold. D. Silver and bronze. Okay. Colonies, European colonies in Africa during the 1800s. Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, England. Let's begin the read. Europeans in Africa. On the continent of Africa, European nations had traditionally traded with coastal kingdoms, never venturing far into the continent. This changed in the mid-1800s when Europeans began sending explorers and missionaries inward. David Livingstone was a Scottish missionary from London who arrived in Africa in 1841 and spent 30 years traveling the continent. Livingstone was looking for a river route that would allow European commerce and Christianity to flow into Africa. Livingstone's letters were detailed enough for people back in England to start drawing maps from them. When Livingstone disappeared, an American newspaper sent a young Welsh journalist named Sir Henry Morton Stanley to track him down. Stanley found Livingstone alive in 1871 and ended up staying in Africa a few years. Stanley explored the Congo River and told the Brits they should set up camp there. The British turned down the idea, but King Leopold II of Belgium was enthusiastic. He wanted to open Africa to his idea of civilization and make a profit. The scramble for Africa. King Leopold II became the driving force behind colonization in Central Africa. In the late 1870s, through Stanley, he set up Belgium settlements in the Congo. New trade routes were established along the new rivalries. The French hurried to plant their flag in northern Africa. Germany and Britain each tried to claim land in East Africa. Spain claimed Western Sahara and part of Morocco. Italy took over Libya and most of Somalia, and Portugal wanted Angola and Mozambique. This rush of colonization activity and Europeans trying to grab a piece of the African continent is known as the Scramble for Africa. Disagreements among the colonizers arise. In 1884 through 1885, these major European nations met at the Berlin Conference. To settle disputes, and formalize imperialist policies in Africa without going to war. The group agreed to partition. Note, partition to divide a country or state into different parts, usually with different types of political rule. Reading continue. The read. The continent. So they partitioned the continent. All this happened without the knowledge of the many different groups of people living on the continent who would now be randomly divided, sometimes across the lines of rival nations, and put to work based on the whims of the Europeans. No African leaders were invited to the conference. The imposed borders bunched Africans into arbitrary groups that didn't represent their cultures or heritage and confused the ownership of local resources. Many of these colonial borders still exist today, along with troubling effects that come with imposing borders that are arbitrarily to the indigenous population. Belgium, Spain, Portugal, France, Great Britain, Italy, and Germany began to organize their settlements, exploit, to take advantage of in an unfair way. The read continues. The people already living there, people were forced to endure such harsh working conditions that by the early 1900s, anywhere from 8 to 16 million Africans had died. Cecil, Rhodes, and the Boer War. The Dutch were the first colonists in southern Africa, founding Cape Town in the 17th century. In 1806, when the British took over the area, which they named Cape Colony, Dutch settlers, also called Boers, decided to leave. The Dutch created two new republics, Transvaal and the Orange Free State. At the same time, the British added their own new colony, Natal, to the east of the Boer states. The Dutch and British settlers were very different. In the British colonies, any wealthy man could vote, regardless of race. In the Boer republics, only white men could vote. Side note, the Boers, spelled Boers, wanted to keep slavery, but the British didn't, so the Boers left. The read continues. When the British discovered diamonds and gold in the Boer republics, they swarmed into Boer territory in the Transvaal looking to get rich. In 1895, the Prime Minister of Cape Colony, Cecil Rhodes, who was also the owner of diamond and gold companies, and a champion of British expansion in Africa, secretly supported a British raid on Transvaal. The Jameson raid was a disaster, and Rhodes was forced to resign. But the damage was done, and the Second Boer War, they had already fought each other about 20 years earlier over control of territory and taxes. The Boers won. Broke out between the British and the Dutch settlers in 1899. In 1902, the vast British army defeated the Boers, and British re-established a new colony, the Union of South Africa, combining the Boer republics with the British Cape Colony. The bottom line: rock paintings in Africa date from the prehistoric times to as recent as the end of the 19th century. For example, paintings from Drakensberg mountain range in South Africa show battles between the indigenous San people and the European colonists, who are shown riding on horseback and holding rifles. The Drakensberg artists are also known for their three-dimensional shading. Here is a picture of the colonies and how they divided Africa. Okay, now the answers to the check on your knowledge. Number one, the answer is European nations had mainly traded with the kingdoms of the African coast. Did that sound right? I repeat, European nations had mainly traded with the kingdoms on the African coast. Plural. 2. Sir Henry Morton Stanley. 3. The Scramble for Africa was started by the new settlements in the Congo and the new trade routes through Africa that King Leopold II of Belgium set up. After Belgium began staking its claims, other countries like France, Germany, Britain, Spain, Italy, and Portugal wanted to get a piece of Africa for themselves. 4. After the Berlin Conference, African nations were divided and taken over by European nations. The pre-existing African groups, tribes, and nations were arbitrarily divided, even if the divisions didn't make any sense, according to the indigenous people's history. 5. Transvaal Orange Free State. 6. Diamonds and gold. And that, my friends, will conclude reading by your friendly neighborhood security officer.